Power to the truth. This is Margo. This is Saturday, December 8th, 2018. And tonight I'm going to present part 2 in that last series that I started a few days ago. If you'll look back, I did a video called 50 Years After How to Wreck the Environment. And it was a paper, it was a review that was done on the chapter from this book that I'm going to read to you tonight. So I will put the link below. Here's the paper that was written by J. Marvin Herndon, Mark Whiteside, and Ian Baldwin. And the paper was published, it was a peer-reviewed paper on geoengineering. And it was published in July of 2018. And if you haven't seen that video or read this paper, I recommend you go back and watch that, and then you'll understand what we're talking about tonight. Now, what I'm going to present tonight is a chapter from this book called Unless Peace Comes. This book was published in 1968. This chapter was written by Gordon J.F. MacDonald from the U.S. And just a little history on Gordon MacDonald. Here's the Wikipedia page. In case anybody wants to learn more about him, I've included some references that you can look at. Gordon James Fraser MacDonald, born July 30th, 1929, and died May 14th, 2002, was an American geophysicist and environmental scientist, best known for his principled skepticism regarding continental drift, now called plate tectonics, and so on and so forth. So you can read about him. He was born in Mexico, but then he went to Harvard and became a geophysicist. So he had a long career. Okay, and he taught at a lot of different universities, and it says outside of academia, MacDonald was a longtime member of the elite Jason Advisory Group of Scientists. So he was on the inside, and so when we read this chapter that he wrote for this book, when we read this tonight, I want you to understand that he had inside information and was on the inside with government agencies and presidential advisory capacity and things like that. So he knew what was coming, and so this is why this is so chilling. So he served on the original Presidential Council on Environmental Quality from 1970 to 72. President Nixon remarked at the time, "I have 3 members of the Harvard class of 1950 on my staff, all summa cum laude." The reference was to Henry Kissinger, James Schlesinger, and MacDonald. MacDonald chaired the CIA's Media Committee, 1993 to 96, a group of environmental scientists convened by the CIA to study whether data from classified intelligence systems could shed light on global environmental issues. He was awarded the CIA's Agency Seal Medallion in 1994. He was chief scientist and vice president of the MITRE Corporation from 1983 to 1990. He later became the director of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. He knew all about climate change even back then. It says MacDonald was a prominent early scientific advocate of action to address the threat of global warming from fossil fuel combustion. By the 1960s, MacDonald was publicly concerned about the potential risks of industrial climate change, both aerosol-induced global cooling and carbon dioxide-driven global warming. MacDonald contributed to the President's Science Advisory Committee Environmental Report in 1965 and the National Academy of Sciences report in 1966 that warned of such risks. In 1969, he began a JASON project to model climate change that soon convinced him that fossil fuel burning would lead to the dangerous global warming that would outstrip any industrial cooling effects. In 1978, MacDonald appeared on the McNeil-Lehrer report, and in 1979 was in an issue of People magazine to warn about fossil fuel-driven global warming. So, see, he was at this a long time ago, and they didn't listen to him, and they haven't listened to experts all the way down. So, anyway, it goes on and on. His interest in climate change was related to his work on weather modification, a controversial but once seemingly viable enterprise. He served on the NSF Advisory Panel for Weather Modification in 1964 to 67. The panel's conclusion that weather modification was possible was immediately attacked on statistical grounds. And so the chapter we're going to read tonight is about geoengineering and weather modification. So he knew all about this even way back then. So there's that. I will leave links below so that everybody can do their own research. I also found this. It's from National Academy of Sciences. It was a biographical memoir PDF that it's 27 pages that they put together, that these scientists who knew him put together, and it's a real good overview of his life, and it's a little bit more in-depth than just a Wikipedia article, and they have a lot of quotes from him. Here's a picture of him. There's his signature. And this is a really good overview of the kind of work that he did and what his views were like, and a little bit about his life if you want to know about that. Then this is an obituary from the American Astronomical Society, and here's another picture of him that was a little older that gives a different overview of him. And then the book that this paper comes from was edited by Nigel Calder. It was published July 22nd, 1968. It's available on Amazon in hardcover and paperback. I couldn't find an ebook edition. And I found used copies over on eBay as well. So, and there's one new book that costs over $1,000. If you want it new, you're going to have to pay a lot of money. But they've got used ones, hardcover, 8 used ones from $27 up, and 13 used paperbacks for $26.30, and 2 new paperbacks starting at $182.25. And I did find some pages from the book that were scanned in, and so I will leave the link below. There are 48 pages here from that book, and each chapter is from a different expert, and they're from different countries, and they're talking about the new weapons and talking about the future of what's coming down with the military and controlling the planet and people and things like that. So I'm probably going to try and get this book, and then I'll be reading from parts of that too. So there's our background. So we're going to start now. And this is important information because what you're going to find is that the powers that be have known about all these things for a very long time, and they've known exactly what they were doing and have taken the wrong turn and the negative way for every fork in the road. Instead of taking the right, they took the left and things like that. And I want to give a thank you to Phosphorus72, who turned me on to the paper that I presented in the other video, which was 50 years after. Turned me on to that, and then I came down this rabbit hole. Unless Peace Comes, a scientific forecast of new weapons. Edited by Nigel Calder. Now this is just a preface from Nigel. With its telling and dispassionate prose, and with its life or death message, this remarkable and urgently important book should and must chill the hearts and sober the thoughts of anyone who reads it. Nigel Calder is a widely known and respected English science writer and editor. For many years he edited London's New Scientist, which achieved a reputation and influence far beyond its circulation. In this volume he has marshaled the services of 16 eminent scientists from 6 countries and asked them from the vantage points of their own disciplines to set down their projections of warfare in the future. No layman who reads this will ever be likely again to characterize the whole scientific community as either oblivious or uncaring. As the French authors of the chapter on chemical warfare put it, the question may arise, is all science damned? We must either eliminate science or eliminate war. We cannot have both. There is undeniably a chilling fascination in these glimpses into the future. At robot centipede tanks fused with H-bombs, at nerve gases, at refined missiles and submarines, at bacterial weapons, at the fatal fallacies built into atomic deterrence, at the possibilities of tampering with nature itself, at all the political, scientific, and military nightmares which mankind is striving to make real. Yet there is no danger that any reader will for a moment lose sight of the fact that Unless Peace Comes is not an extrapolative catalogue of the gadgetry of warfare, but an awesome underlining of the hugest moral imperative in the history of mankind. And so I think this is very prescient today, especially with us being on the brink of World War III, with everything that's going on worldwide, and with the problems with the environment and all the toxins, and it's out of control. Everything is out of control. No one knew exactly how everything would develop. Technology took over. The people that were in charge I believe, are controlled by the dark mind, which I believe is satanic. And with that, we don't have a chance of turning things around or changing things for the better, because they're the ones in charge, and they will always be in charge as long as they're, the dark is here. And I do believe we are in a spiritual battle, and it's going to be playing out in a very, very big way down here on the surface of the planet in very short order. And this is the end. I do believe we're in the end times. A lot of people don't want to hear me saying this. They just want to hear the climate science. But this is my video, and I can say whatever I feel like I need to say. And my message is, and it always has been, time is short, and it's time to get your spiritual houses in order. And the purpose of my videos is to help show you the truth, and to help show you that the people in charge do not have your best interests at heart, and they never have. And this is not our world for those of us who have kind and loving hearts and just want to live in peace and harmony. And so I don't think we have much longer here. And so people are going to be starting to fall off and die and be taken out and different things. And as people go away, other people are going to have to pick up the baton and go forward with showing people the truth, and then you can make an informed decision for yourself as to which side you want to be on. There's no answers in nuclear. They can't fix anything. So that's my preaching for today. But if you don't like it, you can go to another channel, and I won't tolerate people attacking me or trying to put me down or anything like that, because I'm just a messenger, and I'm doing God's work. I'm doing God's work, and if you don't want to hear my message along with me bringing you the truth, then this is not for you. This is for the people who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. So I love every single one of you, and I just wish the best for everybody. And I hope we get out okay, but a lot of people are not, and a lot of people's souls are at stake here. It's not just the planet, it's the souls, because that's what Satan wants. He wants people's souls, and that's what the final battle will be for. So now I will read this chapter from Unless Peace Comes: How to Wreck the Environment by Gordon MacDonald. Professor MacDonald is Associate Director of the Institute of Geophysics and Planetary Physics at the University of California, Los Angeles. His researches have embraced a remarkable diversity of natural phenomena, and his professional interests are further extended by his participation in natural science policy making. He is a member of President Johnson's Science Advisory Committee. And now we begin. Among future means of obtaining national objectives by force, one possibility hinges on man's ability to control and manipulate the environment of his planet. When achieved, this power over his environment will provide man with a new force capable of doing great and indiscriminate damage. Our present primitive understanding of deliberate environmental change makes it difficult to imagine a world in which geophysical warfare is practiced. Such a world might be one in which nuclear weapons were effectively banned, and the weapons of mass destruction were those of environmental catastrophe. Alternatively, I can envisage a world of nuclear stability resulting from parity in such weapons rendered unstable by the development by one nation of an advanced technology capable of modifying the Earth's environment. Or geophysical weapons may be part of each nation's armory. As I will argue, these weapons are peculiarly suited for covert or secret wars. Science fiction literature contains many suggestions of how wars would progress if man indeed possessed the ability to change weather, climate, or ocean currents. Many of these fictional suggestions and other more serious discussions fail to take into account the limitations of nature. Jules Verne gave a detailed discussion of displacing the Earth's polar caps, thus making the world's climatic zones more equitable. Les Voyages Extraordinaires from 1889. Verne's proposal was to eliminate the 23-degree tilt in the Earth's axis, putting it at right angles to the Sun-Earth plane. However, as Verne correctly pointed out in a subsequent discussion, the Earth's equatorial bulge stabilizes our planet, and even the launching of a 180,000-ton projectile would produce a displacement of only 1/10 micron. Senator Estes Kefauver, vice presidential candidate in the 1956 American election, rediscovered Verne's original proposal and was seriously concerned with the tipping of the Earth's axis. He reported that the Earth's axis could, as the result of an H-bomb explosion, be displaced by 10 degrees. Either Senator Kefauver or his scientific advisors neglected the stabilizing influence of the Earth's bulge. The maximum displacement that can be expected from the explosion of a 100-megaton H-weapon is less than 1 micron, as Walter Monk and I pointed out in our book, Rotation of the Earth. Substantial progress within the environmental sciences is slowly overcoming the gap between fact and fiction regarding manipulations of the Earth's physical environment. As these manipulations become possible, history shows that attempts may be made to use them in support of national ambitions. To consider the consequences of environmental modification in struggles among nations, we need to consider the present state of the subject and how postulated developments in the field could lead, 10 to 50 years from now, to weapon systems that would use nature in new and perhaps unexpected ways. The key to geophysical warfare is the identification of the environmental instabilities to which the addition of a small amount of energy would release vastly greater amounts of energy. Environmental instability is a situation in which nature has stored energy in some part of the earth or its surroundings far in excess of that which is usual. To trigger this instability, the required energy might be introduced violently by explosions or gently by small bits of material able to induce rapid changes by acting as catalysts or nucleating agents. The mechanism for energy storage might be the accumulation of strain over hundreds of millions of years in the solid earth, or the supercooling of water vapor in the atmosphere by updrafts taking place over a few tens of minutes. Effects of releasing this energy could be worldwide, as in the case of altering climate, or regional, as in the case of locally excited earthquakes or enhanced precipitation. Weather modification. The Earth's atmosphere is an envelope of air which rotates for the most part at the same speed as the underlying continents and oceans. The relative motion between the atmosphere and the Earth arises from sources and sinks of energy which vary in location and strength, but which have as their ultimate source the sun's radiation. The quantities of energy involved in weather systems exceed by a substantial margin the quantity of energy under man's direct control. For instance, the typical amount of energy expended in a single tornado funnel is equivalent to about 50 kilotons of explosives. A single thunderstorm tower exchanges about 10 times this much energy during its lifetime. An Atlantic hurricane of moderate size may draw from the sea more than 1,000 megatons of energy. These vast quantities of energy make it unlikely that brute force techniques will lead to sensible weather modification. Results could be achieved, however, by working on the instabilities in the atmosphere. We are now beginning to understand several kinds of instabilities in the atmosphere. Supercooled water droplets in cold clouds are unstable, but they remain liquid for substantial periods of time unless supplied with nuclei on which they can freeze. Conversion of water droplets to ice through the introduction of artificial nuclei can provide a local source of energy. This released heat can cause rising air currents, which in turn lead to further formation of supercooled water. This process may lead to rainfall at the ground greater than that which would have been produced without the artificial nucleation. A second instability may arise in which water vapor condenses into water, again affecting the distribution of sensible energy. On a larger scale, there is the so-called baroclinic instability of atmospheric waves that girdle the planet. Through the imbalance of heat between equator and pole, energy in this instability is stored to be released in the creation of large cyclonic storms in the temperate zones. There are other, less well understood instabilities capable of affecting climate. I shall return to them later. What is the present situation with respect to weather modification, and what might be reasonably expected in the future? Experiments over the past 18 years have demonstrated unequivocally that clouds composed of supercooled water droplets can be transformed into ice crystal clouds by seeding them with silver iodide, dry ice, frozen carbon dioxide, and other suitable chemical agents. This discovery has been applied operationally in the clearance of airports covered by supercooled ground fog. No analogous technique has yet evolved for clearing warm fog, although several promising leads are now being investigated. In the case of warm fog, the atmospheric instability is that water vapor distributed in small drops contains more surface energy than the same water distributed in large drops. The trick for clearance of this warm fog will be to discover some way of getting the small drops to organize themselves into larger ones and then fall to the ground. There is increasing, though inconclusive, evidence that rainfall from some types of clouds and storm systems in temperate regions can be increased by 10 to 15% by seeding. Somewhat more controversial evidence indicates that precipitation can be increased from tropical cumulus by techniques similar to those employed in temperate regions. Preliminary experiments on hurricanes have the aim of dissipating the clouds surrounding the eye of the storm in order to spread the energy of the hurricane and reduce its force. The results are controversial but indicate that seeding can, in certain circumstances, lead to a marked growth in the seeded cloud. This possibility may have merit in hurricane modification, but experimentation has not yet resulted in a definitive statement. Regarding the suppression of lightning, there is mixed but largely promising evidence that the frequency of cloud-to-ground strokes that can be reduced by the introduction of chaff, strips of metallic foil of the kind used for creating spurious echoes in enemy radars. In looking to the future, it is quite clear that substantial advances will be made in all of these areas of weather modification. Today, both military and civilian air transport benefit from progress in the clearance of ground fog. Further progress in the technology of introducing the seeding agent into the fog makes it likely that this type of fog dispersal will become routine. In a sense, fog clearing is the first military application of deliberate manipulation of weather, but it is, of course, very limited. Large field programs are being undertaken in the United States to explore further the possibility of enhancing precipitation, particularly in the western and northeastern states. On the high ground of the western states, snow from winter storms provides much of the country's moisture. Investigations are underway to see if seeding can lead to an increased snowpack and thus enhance the water resources. Intense interest in this form of weather modification, coupled with an increased investigation of the physics of clouds, is likely to lead to effective cloud modification within the next 5 to 15 years. At present, the effects are measured only statistically, and too little has been done in cloud observation before and after seeding in the way of precisely pinpointing which clouds are most likely to be affected. As far as military applications are concerned, I conjecture that precipitation enhancement would have a limited value in classical tactical situations, and then only in the future when controls are more thoroughly understood. One could, for example, imagine field commanders calling for local enhancement of precipitation to cover or impede various ground operations. An alternative use of cloud seeding might be applied strategically. We are presently uncertain about the effect of seeding on precipitation downwind from the seeded clouds. Preliminary analysis suggests that there is no effect 200 to 300 miles downwind, but that continued seeding over a long stretch of dry land clearly could remove sufficient moisture to prevent rain 1,000 miles downwind. This extended effect leads to the possibility of covertly removing moisture from the atmosphere so that a nation dependent on water vapor crossing a competitor country could be subjected to years of drought. The operation could be concealed by the statistical irregularity of the atmosphere. A nation possessing superior technology and environmental manipulation could damage an adversary without revealing its intent. Modification of storms, too, could have major strategic implications. As I've mentioned, preliminary experiments have been carried out on the seeding of hurricanes. The dynamics of hurricanes and the mechanism by which energy is transferred from the ocean into the atmosphere supporting the hurricane mechanism are poorly understood, but various schemes for both dissipation and steering can be imagined. Although hurricanes originate in tropical regions, they can travel into temperate latitudes, as the residents of New England know only too well. A controlled hurricane could be used as a weapon to terrorize opponents over substantial parts of the populated world. It is generally supposed that a hurricane draws most of its energy from the sea over which it passes. The necessary process of heat transfer depends on wave action, which permits the air to come in contact with the volume of water. This interaction between the air and water also stirs the upper layers of the atmosphere and permits the hurricane to draw on a substantially larger reservoir of heat than just the warm surface water. There may be ways, using monomolecular films of materials like those developed for covering reservoirs, to reduce evaporation, for decreasing the local interaction between sea and air, and thus preventing the ocean from providing energy to the hurricane in an accelerated fashion. Such a procedure, coupled with selective seeding, might provide hurricane guidance mechanisms. At present, we are a long way from having the basic data and understanding necessary to carry out such experiments. Nevertheless, the long-term possibility of developing and applying such techniques under the cover of nature's irregularities presents a disquieting prospect. Climate modification. In considering whether or not climate modification is possible, it is useful to examine climate variations under natural conditions. firm geological evidence exists of a long sequence of ice ages in the relatively recent past, which shows that the world's climate has been in a state of slow evolution. There is also good geological, archaeological, and historical evidence for a pattern of smaller, more rapid fluctuations superimposed on the slow evolutionary change. For example, in Europe, the climate of the early period following the last ice age was continental, with hot summers and cold winters. In the 6th millennium BC, there was a change to a warm, humid climate with a mean temperature of 5 degrees Fahrenheit higher than at present, and a heavy rainfall that caused considerable growth of peat. This period, known as a climatic optimum, was accentuated in Scandinavia by land subsidence, which permitted a greater influx of warm Atlantic water into the large Baltic Sea. The climate optimum was peculiar. While on the whole there was a very gradual decrease of rainfall, the decrease was interrupted by long droughts during which the surface peat dried. This fluctuation occurred several times, the main dry periods being from 2000 to 1900, 1200 to 1000, and 700 to 500 BC. The last, a dry heat wave lasting approximately 200 years, was the best developed. The drought, though not sufficiently intense to interrupt the steady development of forests, did cause extensive migrations of peoples from drier to wetter regions. A change to colder and wetter conditions occurred in Europe about 500 BC, and was by far the greatest and most abrupt alteration in climate science the end of the last ice age. It had a catastrophic effect on the early civilization of Europe. Large areas of forest were killed by the rapid growth of peat, and the levels of the alpine lakes rose suddenly, flooding many of the lake settlements. This climatic change did not last long. By the beginning of the Christian era, conditions did not differ greatly from current ones. Since then, climatic variations have continued to occur, and although none has been as dramatic as that of 500 BC, a perturbation known as the Little Ice Age of the 17th century is a recent noteworthy example. The cause of these historical changes in climate remains shrouded in mystery. The rapid changes of climate in the past suggest to many that there exist instabilities affecting the balance of solar radiation. Indeed, climate is primarily determined by the balance between the incoming short wave from the sun, principally light, and the loss of outgoing long wave radiation, principally heat. Three factors dominate the balance: the energy of the sun, the surface character of terrestrial regions, water, ice, vegetation, desert, etc., and the transparency of the Earth's atmosphere to different forms of radiated energy. In the last connection, the effect of clouds in making cool days and relatively warm nights is a matter of familiar experience. But clouds are a manifestation rather than an original determinant of weather and climate. Of more fundamental significance is the effect of gases in the atmosphere, which absorb much of the radiation in transit from the sun to the earth or from the earth into space. Intense X-rays and ultraviolet from the sun, together with high-energy atomic particles, are arrested in the upper atmosphere. Only the narrow band of visible light and some short radio waves traverse the atmosphere without serious interruption. There has been much controversy in recent years about conjectured overall effects on the world's climate of emissions of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere from furnaces and engines burning fossil fuels, and some about possible influences of the exhaust from large rockets on the transparency of the upper atmosphere. Carbon dioxide placed in the atmosphere since the start of the Industrial Revolution has produced an increase in the average temperature of the lower atmosphere of a few tenths of a degree Fahrenheit. The water vapor that may be introduced into the stratosphere by the supersonic transport may also result in a similar temperature rise. In principle, it would be feasible to introduce material into the upper atmosphere that would absorb either incoming light, thereby cooling the surface, or outgoing heat, thereby warming the surface. In practice, in the rarefied and windswept upper atmosphere, the material would disperse rather quickly, so that military use of such a technique would probably rely upon global rather than local effects. Moreover, molecular material will tend to decompose, and even elemental materials will eventually be lost by diffusion into space or precipitation to the surface. At intermediate levels in the stratosphere, materials may tend to accumulate, though the mixing time for this part of the atmosphere is certainly less than 10 years and maybe a few months. If a nation's meteorologists calculated that a general warming or cooling of the earth was in their national interest, improving their climate while worsening others, the temptation to release materials from high-altitude rockets might exist. At present, we know too little about the paradoxical effects of warming and cooling, however, to tell what the outcome might be. I'm going to stop there for this video. We're halfway through this article. I will finish it next time. But you get the idea. And Gordon MacDonald was a brilliant mind, probably a brilliant researcher. He could connect the dots and put them together in a lot of ways, and his writing is very understandable to the lay person. And I don't think that when he wrote this, his intentions, I think, were good. And his intentions were to warn people of the possibilities of how things could go wrong and could go bad. But he admits that the research, there was not enough research, and you couldn't say exactly how things would be affected. But essentially, the dark side took his material, this is my opinion, the dark side took his material and his research and twisted it and used what he was saying was the worst case scenario and have put it into play now. And we can see evidence of that worldwide. And I think the breakdown of the climate, the extreme methane levels being released all in the Arctic and the countries worldwide, I think this is evidence, and the sea ice melting in the winter, I think this is evidence of the complete breakdown of the environment, because they've tampered with God's creation, trying to make it better, make it worse, and then use these things as weapons of war. And they were trying to play God, and this is what Satan does. And this is why I say it is satanic. The whole thing is satanic, and to buy into it and to think that we can fix it is wrong, because it's all a satanic system, and the whole system is wrong, and the fix is not a physical fix, it's a spiritual fix. So I will end it there for tonight. I love you. I hope everyone gets their spiritual houses in order before it's too late. Time is so short. I just feel it. I feel that it is so short. I've had dreams every night for the last 4 nights, and I rarely have dreams like that, and I'm being shown things that I can't share right now. But I love everyone, and until next time, God bless you. Go in peace, and goodbye.